Hello, everybody. I'm Tanya, your host, and you are listening to an interview in the series of amazing autistic women. In this series, I interview women on the autism spectrum, and we speak about the everyday life struggles, problems, and limitations that we have. If you want to support me so I can make more interviews, that will be very, very welcome. There is a GoFundMe link below. You can click and contribute. Thank you very much. So let's get into it and welcome Irene from the Netherlands, my guest today. Hi, Irene.
Hi, Taya. Thank you very much for your invitation. And I feel very blessed and grateful that you want to interview me.
Thank you. It's very nice of you. I'm also happy to have you on the show because you have a very interesting story.
Thank you.
So you got your diagnosis in 2008. And how did that feel for you? Could you explain a little bit what happened with you afterwards?
Yeah, sure. I got my diagnosis at what is now called a very late age. I was 26. In 28, I will turn 41 this year. And when I found out that the results of my tests were diagnosed ASD, so autism spectrum disorder, it's one of the variations of autism. I had two thoughts, and the first one was, okay, this is where what I was always feeling, it has a name, so I can put my finger on it.
Mhm.
On the other side, I was very used in getting excluded because I was behavioring differently. And I grew up in a small community, and if you weren't normals, but what's normal nowadays, you were already excluded from the community. So, for example, if I was being open about my autism, I would be excluded, and I didn't want to tell it. So, my other feeling was, okay, just get rid of me, and this is where it all ends. However, because I found out that autism was chronic, so it cannot be cured. There's no medication for it. I was thinking, okay, what about my life with autism and the ways you can live your life with it? Because if it cannot be cured, it can be made more livable. So with that reflection, I started living my life, and that was quite nice because now I could start living my life in an adapted way. And I did. And however, it didn't always went the way I wanted it. It wasn't always very good. I struggled in it. I struggle with it somewhat every day, but I, in the end, managed to live it. And I'm quite happy about it, even after it has been so long.
And what are the struggles that you experience in everyday life?
Um, I always, because autism cannot be seen from the outside, because it's something that is happening internally or better spoken on the inside, people don't always see what is going on. So, for example, if I'm feeling very anxious or a very large form of panic or anxiety, and I'm feeling it from inside, people cannot see it. So, for example, in my current work, if something is going on, I really need to point it out because people cannot see it. And that's where I'm always struggling with, because people in the current society are encouraging the fact that you must be open and vulnerable, and I'm really willing to accept it. However, there are always people stating A and doing B, so I'm always very cautious in my behavior about it, and that's what makes me struggle, because on the one side, I want to be open and vulnerable about it, and on the other side, I always get the feeling that it's not possible, which is a very large pity for me. It's very sad still,
Why is it not possible?
because sometimes when you're open about it, people are encouraging it, but in the end, they are rejecting you on it.
Mm. They put the stigma. Or
Exactly. They're still stigmatizing, and in the current society, in the current world, people are tending to be more open and vulnerable about it because there are lots of policies concerning diversity and inclusivity, which has a lot to do with destigmatization and less prejudices. It is going the right way, but there are still some cases where it is not the fact.
I see what you mean, yes. So you say that you'd like to be open about it, but then people put the stigma on us, and yeah, for me it's very
Yeah.
important to make visible what to make our struggles visible here, because most of the time, um, as you said earlier, it's not seen, right? It's invisible.
And people always tend to see always the more negative sides than the positive sides. And for me, it could be very more encouraging to see what talents people have instead of focusing on the uh, things there that aren't there in a positive way.
Mm-hmm. For example, what do you think is the positive side of the autism?
Well, I always learned that people with autism are very genius. For example, there are some scientists or founders like Einstein or Elon Musk who are diagnosed with autism. So they are very talented in several things they have done. For example, in things they founded, for example, Tesla's or other articles. So they have very great talent, which they had expanded, and they are compensating the talents with the parts in their brain, because it has everything to do with the brain, that are less developed, and in that way they can balance it. So for example, my autism has taught me and shown me that I am very talented in languages and sports and dancing, and I'm less talented in social networking or dealing with panic attacks, for example. And by focusing on both, I can compensate it, and it makes my life somewhat more livable, because I know, because of my autism, where I'm good at and where I'm less good at, and it keeps me balanced. And people always tend to focus on the things that are less positive instead of the things that are very positive. And that's the same with people with autism, because when I was studying, because I have a master's degree in French linguistics, people always tend to focus on which is not possible instead of focusing what is possible, or focusing on what's invisible instead of what is visible. So to give you an example, I was in university, I was just starting there, and because of my autism, I had an explanation either from my GP and my psychologist, stating that I was having and experiencing some problems with my because of my autism, and I needed some support in order to make my autism workable. So, for example, I just needed two things. I needed an extra space, because attending working colleges as well as hearing colleges with, for example, 500 people, it was very challenging, because there are 500 other people in the room, and I need to process all the noises from them, all the stimulations. It's the same when making exams. So if you're in a very large college hall with 500 or 600 other people, for me, it's not doable. I cannot manage that. So I needed an extra room as well as extra space, because the information processing is not as fast as people not having autism.
Mm.
And I was going to my student's advisor. I made an appointment with him, and I explained to him what was the problem. And I sent him in advance the reports and the explanations and declarations of my GP and my psychologist. And one of the first things he said, well, Irene, you have decorations written, and talking to you in public, I don't see anything wrong. So I'm not going to grant them to you because it is invisible and I cannot see it. And it made me very mad because even if it is not visible, he gave me the feeling that I was lying,
Mm,
that I wasn't honest, but I don't lie. I don't lie about this. Why should I?
mm,
And then I asked him, okay, I understand your problem. What needs to happen in order for you to grant me my support, which I need to make it more functional? And he said to me literally, well, just come back in a wheelchair because then your deficit is visible.
mm.
It was inhuman. It was inhuman because then at that stage, I didn't feel very heard and seen as well as valued.
Of course. And did you expect a rejection at all before when you did
No,
everything? No, of course not.
I was expecting either a yes or a no, because those were my two options. But I didn't expect a no because of that reason.
Mm,
And it well, we never became great friends, to be honest, which is fine. But at that stage, I became very how to say it in English. I've always felt the urge to prove myself. So I did. I contacted the dean because I needed some other arrangements. And one of the first things he said, well, Irene, my son has Asperger, and for me, he's a genius and very talented, and he's one of the pearls in my life, figuratively. So I don't know why you are rejected because of this. So she gave him a ring, and then I was granted. He was not amused. He felt rejected. Yeah, it's the same as I was.
mm.
And
We need
it
to feel
really
angels.
gave me a lot of strength because of that, because I felt heard and seen.
Ah, very good. We need some angels sometimes to be seen in life.
Sometimes angels do exist, but not always.
So you said, yeah, you have the sensory issues, like many autistics say, with
Yeah.
the hearing, the processing of all the noise and 500 people at university. I can expect, yeah, I know, I can relate how tough that is. What other things do you experience that limit your everyday life?
Well, not being capable of seeing social cues, because I can do social networking. For example, when I was studying, we had a lot of network drinks with my students' association and my study association, which is fine, which was very good. However, when it became more thoroughly, with more deeper connections, I was scared because I never learned how it worked. And I could never, for example, read the body language of people. So that makes it very hard because I was always in my head, I had standard sentences of how I should network. And I know in daily life, it's not always standard, it can differ. And that's what makes it very hard and very challenging because I thought, okay, if I cannot use my or apply my standard sentences, what will happen? And that what made me very insecure about my friendships and social relations in general. And now I know because I have friends who are either in the autistic spectrum or having relatives with autism or Asperger or another form of autism. And it's quite a relief because I don't have to explain why things aren't happening, or for example, why my head is full. And
Mm.
that's very nice. But because of the social things, I don't always feel very well because I want to have friends, but because I don't know how it works, it's somewhat challenging and very hard.
And did you find some kind of solutions other than just having friends who are
Yeah.
also on the spectrum?
Yeah, I did, because I found out if you have one common interest, for example, in my case, it was Zumba and social dancing, you always have something to talk about. There's always one thing in common, and it will go directly. It will go itself. So I didn't have to think about topics to discuss on, because there was always something going on, which was, for example, we were discussing the Zumba, and then we were discussing daily lives and other things.
Mm,
So that what made this very easy for me.
very smart.
Thank you.
By the way, if you're listening now, I made a short course which you can get for free. And in that course, I explain a few more details of and a few more tools and tricks that you can use in everyday life to cope with your problems. It's below the video, the link will be there, and you can get it after the video. Um,
Very nice.
yeah, thank you, Irene, to explain all these things. Is there anything else you think you could think about, like in terms of limitations you told us? So sensory problems, not being heard, yeah, interaction, social interactions with the scripting. Anything else?
Um, well, I think that covers a lot. But I was in a training special for people specialized with autism, with how do you call it? People having autism as well. And I'm experiencing problems in other domains than other people having autism. So, for example, there was a guy aged, I think he's now 65. He was experiencing problems, for example, with going out with his dog. And when I heard that for the first time, I was wondering, what is causing you the problem? Because when I was living at my parents' house, we had a small dog, and either one of my other sisters were walking out with the dog, and for me it was not a problem. But so I asked him, "What is giving you the problems, so I can understand you better?" And he said to me, "Well, I'm always taking the same direction, and sometimes I have to skip the street because there's construction work and I have to go into another direction by taking up my dog." And he told me, "Well, I don't hate taking up my dog, but it's just a thing that every day I'm meeting other people. I'm meeting different people, and I cannot process the people. I cannot prepare." And then I was thinking about it, and I thought, yeah, yeah, it's true. It
Mm-hmm.
can be very hard and challenging too. And for him, it really gave him goosebumps. So that can be a deficit too. Or, for example, because of autism, some people are scared by taking the train, because if you don't have a direct connection, you need to change trains, and if you don't know how it works, or you haven't done it a lot of times, like I did, it can be very hard, because it can be very stressful, because things are changing, and changes are challenging for people with autism as well.
Yes, very much.
Yeah.
Mhm. You told me in our first chat that you are part of an association which is called Human Book Library, and I found that was really, really interesting. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Sure. It is the Human Library Organization, and their headquarters are in Denmark. And this organization was founded, I thought it was either 2001 or 2002. I'm not sure, so forgive me if I'm wrong, Ronnie. Ronnie's the founder. Um, and it was founded to how can I explain it? It was founded to get rid of stigmas, to be more in favor of destigmatization, getting out of prejudices. So, for example, I'm there as a human book. and my book title is either autistic or female autist. It can either be interpreted very broadly. And the human books, who are part of the human library, they all have titles of which people have prejudices or stigmas. And um, by participating in the human book, either as a reader or as a human book, you can have conversations, and with those conversations, you can avoid or be more open about something on which you have stigmas. For example, I have autism, but I also know books, for example, who are tattooed all over the body, who have non-acquired brain injury, or people who are abused when they were younger. And people always have prejudices about those because you cannot imagine it can be very hard. So by having a conversation with me, in my book title Autistic, people can ask me questions and I can ask them questions too. We can have a very open dialogue.
Mm.
And by having dialogue, you can have a more open conversation, and it can create more openness by being because I'm open and vulnerable about my book title. And for me, it's very nice because it can create awareness. Because most of the time, people who are reading me, they have no awareness at all, or they think they have awareness. And when asking more questions and sharing more about my story, I found out that it's very little. And
Mm.
by sharing my story, I can be very open and vulnerable about it, and people will see and hear me. And it gives me a very large boost because I can be myself. People will not reject me. People will have an opinion, which is fine, but it will not be that less positive. And I'm doing it for around, I think it's more than 4 years. I started in 2019. And it really gives me strength because it shows me how my progress is and what my acceptance of my autism for myself is.
Yeah.
And by sharing my story and by having those conversations, I'm really boosted.
Hmm. And what is the main stigma that people have about autism? What do you think?
Well, most of the people know the movie track Rain Man, and he is having autism, but he is just doing one thing, and socially, he's not capable. And people always tend to see, well, people with autism aren't socially active. They don't show, and they aren't, and they can't show empathy. They are, yeah, they don't know how to function. They can't do the things in a very good way as other people can. But in the end, people with autism are having very high IQs and less high EQs, and they can compensate this very well. And another stigma about me being a female is that I always hear, well, we know male autistics, and it's much more accepted than female autistics.
Oh, you think so?
Well, there is some kind of truth because when I was younger, I already felt that I had autism, but I didn't get tested. I was always acting because females can act and they can mask very well, so they can always pretend there's nothing going on,
Mm.
and that can explain the fact that it is known, but it's less known than males having autism.
Mm.
And that's what I always explain because people always ask me the question, well, I don't know that much females having autism. I know a lot more males having autism.
Mm. You think there's no space for a female autistic?
No fate?
No space?
Oh,
Like,
space. I'm sorry. I thought you said fate.
no, no space. Like, now they start to know, okay, there is the masculine part of the autistic, maybe Sheldon Cooper, or but they cannot
Yeah, from Big Bang Theory.
they cannot
I
imagine
love him.
Yeah, he's funny. I cannot imagine the feminine part of that. Mm.
Well, there is much more space for feminine autistics because compared to, for example, 5 years ago, there's much more space because it is more common.
Mhm.
Because I know in my environment that a lot of younger females are getting tested. For example, at age 5 or 6, it has been tested at a very young age. So there's more ground for it. There's more space and there's more acceptance.
Mm. So let's see in future. Things are going to change very fast.
Hopefully.
Good. Do you have a take-home message for any autistic woman who is listening today?
Um, well, for me, at the beginning, when I just found out, I thought it was very negative because I was feeling excluded already. And by receiving the result of the test, which was ASD, I felt excluded, I felt less, and I didn't have a lot of confidence because I was interpreting it as something that was not positive. However, after getting a lot of treatments in the hospital, as well as trainings in autism and experiencing and sharing my story, I am seeing and interpreting my autism as something very unique. It's my strength. And for me, my autism is not a way of doing and thinking and acting. And when explaining it to adults, I always tell them that there's one part in my brain which is very high developed, and there are other parts in my brain which are less highly developed. And by seeking a balance on that, it is okay. It's fine. But it cost me some time to find out and to make this interpretation and somewhat analysis. So I never gave up. I continued on living with it because it will be part of my life. I You can be born with you were born with it and you will die with it. It's just as it is. And I'm always seeking possibilities instead of difficulties. That's my motto. So think in possibilities instead of difficulties because autism is a strength. Because of my autism, I know what my talents are, where I'm good at. And I also know where I'm less good at and where I can work on. And that's what keeps me focused and balanced. And in that way, I hope I can inspire other people because that's what I want to do.
Yeah, very nice. I think that was very inspiring what you said.
Thank you.
Mhm. Okay, then I think we can close for today. Thank you very much for this interview. Um, I will link this human book library, more information about that below. And I thank you very much, Irene, for taking the time today to speak with us.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
You're
My pleasure.
most welcome. Bye.
Bye.